Okay, so we're now going to continue this scenario of calculating the cost of a customer's order. And so we're going to move on now, and we're going to add something to the story. The story is that she comes and in her order she buys 5 lattes. So the question is, which of these items are going to go inside of a memory location? Well, in order to calculate the cost of a customer's order, what we need to know is how many that she bought. And so we are going to put a 5 in there. And so we're going to put that in here. So go ahead and write 5 in that box. Alright, and then we are going to give it a name. And so the name is, of course, or not of course, but we can call it num of lattes. And so one of the things when we do deal with naming variables, which by the way this is not a legal identifier, we're not dealing with specific Java protocol right now. We're just as we would just in normal life, we might call it the number of lattes or the num of lattes if we're trying to use an abbreviation. So we're naming this. Now again, this box is a storage location. It's a named storage location or memory location. So the box is a variable. Its variable name or identifier is the num of lattes, and its value is the 5. Okay, now if we look at this, go, well, what kind of data is this variable or storage location using? And we can see that if somebody's going to come in and order lattes, they're not going to order part of a latte. They're going to order whole number lattes. So integers or whole numbers is what they're going to do. Now, we call that that data type in Java is called int. We learned about string. So one data type is a string. Another data type is an int with a lowercase I. And it's important that it's lowercase, string is uppercase. Okay, then the next thing that happens is the next thing that we need to know about this order is what is the cost per latte. And so let's just say that the cost per latte is 3.5. Now some of you might want to, well, why don't we put the $sign in there? Okay, so, well, that's a good question. We'll talk about that later. Or why don't we put 5 lattes in here? Oops. Why don't we put 5 lattes in there? Well, we'll talk about that in a second. So first of all, the cost per latte, we're dealing with money, so most of the time money means that we're dealing with decimals. And so this particular storage place is declared to be now the double is not, or decimal is not the name of the data type, but double is. And so you'll notice here that this storage cell or memory location is designed to store decimals or doubles. This one's designed to store ints, and this one's designed to store strings. And that is the same way that you have a storage for utensils, another storage for cups, another storage for cereal, another storage for frozen goods. And that's the idea with variables, is that there's different types. They have different data types. Now, why don't we put the word latte in here? Well, latte is a word. Right here. It's got letters in it. It's got characters. Well, that would make it a string. So latte is not an int. It's not an integer. In the same way, this right here, to have the dollar sign, is now a character or a symbol. It's not a decimal. A decimal is just numbers and a decimal point. And so you can't do that. Now, this will be something you have to be careful when you start writing programs. Okay, the last area that we're going to store data in is going to be a memory location whose name is cost of order. And of course, to do that, we need to calculate it. And so we're going to take the 5 times the let's do it this way. We're going to take 5 times 3.5 and so we're going to get 17.5 or $17.50. So the value of the cost of order variable is going to be 17.5. Now of course that's going to be a double as well. Alright. Okay, so now we want to summarize the scenario. And so the way we're going to summarize this scenario is we're going to make a statement. And that statement is that Sally Sue purchased 5 lattes for $17.50. So this summarizes what just happened. Okay, in programs, that's some of the things that they will do, is they will actually summarize data and display it on the screen. And then in a sense, that's what we're doing, is we're coming up with the amount so that maybe we can charge the customer that much, so they know how much they're paying for the order. So now we're essentially done with the scenario, but we need to analyze something that's very important, and this is a critical statement to understand, so you want to make sure you're writing this down. And that this important statement is that variables store data. We call them values. 17.5, 3.55, Sally Sue, those are all, that's data. We call them values. Store data that will be used later in the program. It's going to be data that will be called. The variables will be called later in the program. So it's just like when you store your utensils in this drawer. You don't store them there just so they can sit there. You store them in a specific place so that you know where they are, so that when you need to use them, you can go to that spot, take one out, and use it. And that's what's going to happen in our programs. We stored Sally, we stored 5, 3.5, and 17.5 in the 4 different variables. Well, were used, each of these has been used later. So the question is, let's take Sally Sue. When was Sally Sue, when was the value of customer name used in the program? Now some people are going to say that it was used in customer name. No, this isn't where it was used. This is where it was stored. Okay, so that when you put your utensils in the drawer, you're not using them, you're storing them. So when was it used in the program? Okay, it was used in the summary. So right here, whoops, this is when the variable customer name was used, the value of it was used in the program. We say that the variable customer name was called. When it's used, it's called. And what's used is its value. Alright, then 5. When was 5 used in the program? Again, 5 is not used in right here. This is not when it's used. Okay, because it's actually being stored there. So it's actually being, so you think of it yourself, where is 5 being used? Well, the first time it's used is in the cost of the order. So we stored that 5 there, so later on we could use it to calculate the cost of the order. So it was called, this num of lattes was called, and we used its value. But is there another time it was called? Well, it was actually called or used in the summary. So this is, these places that we have boxed, one thing you could do is you could draw an arrow or something like that and maybe write variable, and you could always abbreviate to save room and time. You could say variable used. Okay, and so these are the different places that the variable is used. This word right here is used. It's hard to use. Okay, now where is 3.5 used? Well, 3.5 is used to calculate the cost of the order, and that's the only place. It's not used anywhere else. Well, what about the value of this variable, 17.5? When was this used? It's used in the summary. Now, do I want to include the dollar sign in what's being used? No. This is where it's used, is in the summary. This part of it is where it's being used. So all of these are variable calls, or these are when the values of variables are used. Well, how does the rest of this get printed? You remember string literals, or strings, literal strings we called them. You're going to see when we go through this in Java that we're going to be using a term called concatenation, and everything else is going to be within strings. So we're going to be printing or displaying on the screen values of variables and the display of strings, literal strings or string literals. So just one final statement is, remember that variable, this is very important right here, variables store data that will be used later in the program. And that's the idea, and we'll continue, or we're going to show how this works with Java in our next class.